The morning lecture series this week, themed The Ethics of Dissent, is part of an ongoing collaboration between Chautauqua Institution and the David and Joan Lincoln family to focus program resources on contemporary issues and applied ethics. The Lincoln family has also endowed applied ethics chairs across the departments of Arizona State University. Some of these professors we have the honor each season at Chautauqua to help supplement our programming. Chautauqua joins ASU and the wider community of people whose lives David Lincoln touched in mourning the loss of our dear friend earlier this year. We're grateful to his daughter Katie, who continues her family's legacy, for her continued support of Chautauqua and of this week's series. Today's lecture is sponsored by the Barbara and Herb Kaiser Fund. This fund was established in 2011 by Dr. Herbert Kaiser, his wife Barbara Kaiser, and his son and daughter-in-law, Christopher Kaiser and Susan Sprung. Herb is known as the King of Tarts at Chautauqua. You can see him with his cart of lemon tarts sold to benefit the Chautauqua Fund every Monday morning outside the Amphitheater. The Kaisers have been coming to Chautauqua since 1981, and they now share this special Chautauqua experience with 6 children and 10 grandchildren. Please join me in thanking the Lincoln and Kaiser families for their support of Chautauqua. Bari Weiss is a writer and editor for the New York Times opinion section, where she writes about culture and politics. Before joining the Times a year ago, Bari was an op-ed editor at the Wall Street Journal and an associate book review editor there. For 2 years, she was a senior editor at Tablet, the online magazine of Jewish news, politics, and culture, where she edited the site's political and news coverage. Earlier this month, Bari won the Reason Foundation's 2018 Bastiat Prize, which annually honors writing that best demonstrates the importance of freedom with originality, wit, and eloquence. The judges cited her brilliant, incisive journalism defends that cornerstone of individual liberty in civil society, freedom of speech. Bari is a proud Pittsburgh native and a graduate of Columbia. And if you read today's daily, I also think you'll see that Bari is fearless in sharing her opinions and is tough to pin down with a label. She has taken on the liberal left for labeling anything they disagree with as fascist, and in a wonderful interplay with yesterday's talk, taken on publicly some of those who were given this lecture yesterday, to the point that we prayed we didn't put them on the same plane. As she says, and I quote, "You can go through life playing it safe, or you can go through life saying what you really think. To me, the choice is a no-brainer." We're pleased to host her at Chautauqua for her first time, along with her parents, Anne and Lou, who are with us this morning. Please join me in offering a warm Chautauqua welcome to Bari Weiss.
I am absolutely honored to be here. Thank you, Michael, and really thank all of you for inviting me to speak during a week that's celebrating the cornerstone virtues of this place, the virtues of free speech and free thinking. So from this storied stage where American presidents and Supreme Court justices have held forth before generations of Chautauquans before you, I just have a quick survey question. Show of hands, how many of you remember George Carlin's 7 dirty words you can't say on television? Put them up. I thought so, you filthy, filthy people. So for those of you who forget the words, here's a quick refresher. You have your S word, your P word, no, not Trump's P word, but the other one. You have your classic, my favorite, the F-bomb. You have a C word followed by yet another C word, an F word involving a mother, and finally, and somewhat inexplicably, tits. Now, I mention these unmentionables for good reason. The title of my talk today is The New 7 Dirty Words, but it's impossible to talk about them without returning briefly to the original ones And it's pure serendipity, as I've heard, that George Carlin's daughter, Kelly, is also here this week, so I think it's some kind of sign. In May 19... Yes. So in May 1972, Nixon and Brezhnev signed the SALT Treaty in Moscow. The first patent was issued for the first fiber optic cable. The island of Okinawa was returned to Japan. The Boston Bruins won the Stanley Cup. The notorious B.I.G. was born in Brooklyn. And George Carlin made comic history on a Santa Monica stage. There are 400,000 words in the English language, Carlin told his audience, and yet 7 of them, for apparently no good reason, can't be said on television. Those are the heavy 7. Those are the ones that will infect your soul, curve your spine, and keep the country from winning the war, he quipped. Would Carlin be shoved into a police car and jailed for obscenity as Lenny Bruce had so many times before him? Well, he wasn't put into the paddy wagon that particular night. That would come later, during a summer show in Milwaukee. But Carlin's electric set became an instant classic. And thanks to an American dad and CBS executive named John Douglas, who happened to overhear it in the car with his 15-year-old son on a road trip to Yale University, Carlin made Supreme Court history too, when the court ruled that the FCC was right to deem the routine indecent. I have to tell you that I laughed when I reread the Carlin saga. It feels heartbreakingly quaint, a story from an entirely different age, maybe even an entirely different country. As anyone who follows the high aesthetic tone of our public life knows, these words now permeate the culture. We are living through the most obscene era of American history. Nothing is sacred. Everything can be said and seen. The very notions of decency, of civility, of tolerance seem almost embarrassing in their earnestness, at least outside of the gates of Chautauqua. No one exhibits the callousness of our era. No one shows the way toward a crueler public conversation better than the President of the United States. A quick drive-by of some of the most vile things that he has said, not that this crowd needs it. On Mexicans, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. On Haitian immigrants, they all have AIDS. On women, I don't even wait. When you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the pussy, you can do anything. On Maxine Waters, an extraordinarily low IQ person. That's not even the dog whistle, it's just the dog. And yet the tabooless reality that Trump is trailblazing for us every day is only half of the truth. The whole truth is that we live in a deeply paradoxical time. In politics, which is controlled right now by the Trumpist Republican Party, we live in the era in which everything can be said. But in the culture, which is largely controlled by the left, we are living in an era in which very little can be. I know, America is a liberal democracy with a constitution and a First Amendment that protects our freedom of speech and the press. Legally, we are able to say just about anything, technically. But everyone knows that experientially that isn't true. There are subjects and perspectives, a ballooning number of them, that are radioactive. Touch them, or say the wrong thing about any of them, and you can lose your job, your friends, or your social standing. These are things that we might readily share in the comfort of our kitchen, but would hesitate to say in an office cooler, let alone in the pages of a newspaper. Now let me be very, very clear. I am not talking about things that shouldn't be said by any decent person. Racist, hateful, bigoted speech that is taboo for good reason. I'm talking about ideas and observations that are up for debate. Ideas and observations that just a few years ago would have been deemed commonsensical. For example, the idea that there are some fundamental differences between men and women. We have seen what happens to people who dare venture into this there be dragons territory on the intellectual map. They are met with outrage and derision, even, or perhaps especially, from people and institutions that pride themselves on open-mindedness. Nearly half a century ago, George Carlin had his 7 dirty words. Today, I want to suggest to you that we have a new set of them. And just as those original dirty words have lost much of their ability to shock, a new set of words has become far more explosive. They are imagination, humility, proportion, empathy, judgment, reason, and doubt. Now, none of those 7 would qualify as anything close to a curse word or a euphemism for genitalia. Indeed, on the surface, they surely all seem old-fashioned, square, maybe even a little boring. But these 7 words are words that signify precious ideas that have fallen out of fashion or favor, or have purposefully been contaminated by those who are making a concerted attempt to significantly redraw the bounds of acceptable thought and speech. Trump and Trumpism is the flashy and urgent threat to our democracy. The case against him and what he represents is made every day, and powerfully so, in papers like mine, and I'm sure in communities like this one. But today I want to make the case to you that the fact that these 7 values have been made profane represents a subtler, but perhaps an equally insidious threat. It's a threat that I think is in part an understandable reaction to our current president, but it is one that I think will remain with us when he is out of office. And if we want a chance at reviving our civic culture, at making it sane and humane again, we can't wait for our leaders to show the way. It is up to us to recover them. So the first word, imagination. I submit to you that the most beautiful words ever written about the American ideal were uttered by, who else? Abraham Lincoln. They concern the moral and political imagination required to believe in a nation that is not built on the politics of blood and soil, but on a shared set of ideas, on a common secular faith. It was July 4th, 1858, and Lincoln was speaking to his fellow Americans. We have, besides these men, he said, descended by blood from our ancestors, among us perhaps half of our people who are not descendants at all of these men. If they look back through this history to trace their connection with those days by blood, they find they have none. They cannot carry themselves back to that glorious epoch and make themselves feel that they are a part of us. These Americans he was speaking to were not, in other words, the literal sons and daughters of those first settlers who came over on the Mayflower. But they are, Lincoln argues, in every single sense, their descendants. Why? Because, as he said, when they look through that old Declaration of Independence, they find that those old men say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And then they feel that the moral sentiment taught in that day evidences their relation to those men, that it is the father of all moral principle in them, and that they have a right to claim it is as though they were the blood of the blood and the flesh of the men that wrote that declaration. And so they are. He continued, this is the electric cord. That is the electric cord in that declaration that links the hearts of patriotic and liberty-loving men together, that will link those patriotic hearts as long as the love of freedom exists in the minds of men and of women throughout the world. This concise statement is the greatest rebuke I have ever encountered to the poison of identity politics, which insists on the opposite of Lincoln's vision. and insists that such imagination is pointless because we're all locked into the lanes assigned to us by birth. You see, there's no purpose in a white straight man ever attempting to understand the experience of a black lesbian or a transgender Jew or a Latino person in a wheelchair, because they can never fully know the experience and the pain of what it is to be a minority or to be the other. In this view of the world, it is the randomness of the circumstances of your birth that defined you and your path, not your ideas, but your identity. This ideology explains the daily war being waged against the latest sin of so-called cultural appropriation, in which a white woman painter is punished for rendering a chilling, powerful image of a dead Emmett Till, in which a high school student is torn apart on the internet for wearing a traditional Chinese dress to her prom, in which a taco truck is boycotted because its owners are of the wrong race, in which the actress Scarlett Johansson is shamed into pulling out of a movie in which she'd play a transgender character. I could go on, but I suspect you can recite the rest of the litany from memory. And this isn't just a problem on the political left. The far right is running on this worldview here at home and especially across Europe, insisting that they are the only true heirs to Western civilization, that immigration represents an existential threat because it threatens our current demographic reality. It is right-wing identity politics that explains the white supremacists marching in Charlottesville, shouting, "Jews will not replace us." This frozen understanding of identity, this cramped understanding of reality, leads first to self-obsession, then to division, and it ultimately undermines the American ethos. Identity politics is a refutation of the most foundational and beautiful American idea, which is that there is something that binds every one of us together, which transcends our genders, our sexual orientations, our races, and our religions. What's required to become an American is a commitment to a shared set of ideas, not being born here, not having the right last name or the right skin tone. The motto of our country contains this ideal, e pluribus unum, out of many one. You know who gets this? Barack Obama. Just last week in South Africa, our former president delivered a stinging rebuke toward the identity politics that is fast swallowing the left. He said, "Democracy demands getting inside the reality of people who are different than us so that we can understand their point of view. Maybe we can change their minds, but maybe they'll change ours. You can't do this if you disregard what your opponents have to say from the start. You can't do it if you insist that those who aren't like you, because they're white or because they're male, that somehow there's no way to understand what I'm feeling, that somehow they lack the standing to speak on certain matters." The antidote to identity politics is imagination, a moral and political imagination that allows us to feel the spark of that electric chord even today. In other parts of the world, biology, birthplace, class, rank, gender, race, those are your destiny. Not here, which is why we need to bring back that dirty word, imagination. My second word is humility. Humility has become a dirty word. Evidence of this lack of humility on the part of our self-declared intellectual and moral betters abounds. Consider the case of Laura Ingalls Wilder, the once celebrated author of Little House on the Prairie, whose very name has now become a byword for racism. Earlier this summer, the Association for Library Services to Children voted unanimously to drop Wilder's name from its award for children's writers and illustrators. The decision was made in consideration of the fact that Wilder's legacy, as represented by her body of work, the committee said, includes expressions of stereotypical attitudes inconsistent with the association's core values of inclusiveness, integrity, respect, and responsiveness. What are those expressions? In her 1935 book, Wilder's writes of one place There were no people, only Indians lived there. And various characters share the expression throughout her works, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. Now, anyone who says those things today would rightly be chastised. But Laura Ingalls Wilder was born in 1867. Slavery had ended just 2 years before her birth with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. American women were more than 50 years away from getting the right to vote. She was, like every single one of us, a creature of her time. Yet the arbiters of culture are convinced that she deserves to be censored for her 19th century morals based on the morals we hold dear today. It's not just literature that's come under assault by people mouthing platitudes about understanding without practicing it themselves. In December, at the height of the Me Too movement, a 30-year-old feminist with an art history degree from a Tony University began a petition that garnered thousands of responses and made headlines in the New York Times. Her request? That the Metropolitan Museum of Art should warn its viewers about the dangers of looking at art. When I went to the Met this past weekend, her petition began. I was shocked to see a painting that depicts a young girl in a sexually suggestive pose. Balthus's painting, Therese Dreaming, is an evocative portrait of a prepubescent girl relaxing on a chair with her legs up and her underwear exposed. This is what she wrote about the 1938 French painting. She continued, "Given the current climate around sexual assault and allegations that become more public each day, in showcasing this work for the masses without providing any type of clarification, the Met is, perhaps unintentionally, supporting voyeurism and the objectification of children." Now, make no mistake, Therese Dreaming does sexualize a child on the cusp of puberty. The painting does put her in a sexually suggestive pose, and the artist, by all accounts, absolutely had an infatuation with young girls. But follow this logic, and what would we excise next from the canon? As the always sharp art critic Jerry Saltz put it in New York Magazine, if we remove the Balthus because it offends in the current climate, we pretty much have to remove whole wings from the Met. The art of India, Greece, Rome, and Africa is rife with bestiality, orgies, blatant nakedness, and sex. Much of the art of the Oceania depicts exaggerated phalluses and vulva. Japanese art flagrantly breaks every taboo. It is a given that literature and art will offend. That is in its nature. Likewise, it is also a given that the cultural and social mores of the past will change. 50 years from now, which one of us will be erased for the sin of eating animal flesh? Or for the sin of publicly humiliating another person on the internet? Or for walking around another creature on a leash? Or for watching a sport that resulted in almost universal brain damage among its players? Or any number of transgressions that today seem acceptable, but tomorrow could become an abomination? I would bet my life that my grandchildren will be deeply ashamed for me for something or other that seems entirely normal to us right now. But I hope that they won't erase me. Knowing that the morality of 2018 isn't the end point of history should inform the way that we view those who came before us. Let's let go a little bit of our hubris and lean into humility. Proportion. Proportion is my third dirty word. You are effing useless. Get the F out. F you. You have created a space for violence. Why the F did you accept this position? Who the F hired you? You should step down. You should not sleep at night. You are disgusting. All of those sentences were uttered from the mouths, or rather screamed, by students attending Yale University. What would compel them to use such language? What kind of behavior would inspire anyone to speak to another human being that way. Perhaps you might use such language to tear down a neo-Nazi or confront your sexual assaulter. You can imagine a victim saying as much to Charles Taylor at The Hague. But these Yale students were screaming these sentences at a celebrated college professor named Nicholas Christakis. His crime? Halloween costumes. Specifically, defending the right of students to dress up for Halloween as they see fit. So here's the quick story. 2 years ago, a Yale dean sent a note to students asking them to avoid wearing any costume that, quote, disrespects, alienates, or ridicules segments of our population based on race, nationality, religious belief, or gender expression. Erica Christakis, an early childhood expert who at the time oversaw Yale Silliman College with her sociologist husband, Nicholas, wrote an email to her residents explaining why so-called offensive costumes might be okay. What her email said was, use your good judgment. But it said it brilliantly and sharply, and in a way that was deeply respectful of her students. She wrote, I don't actually trust myself to foist my Halloweenish standards and motives on others. Have we lost faith in young people's capacity, in your capacity, to exercise self-censor through social norming, and also in your capacity to ignore or reject things that trouble you? If you don't like a costume someone is wearing, look away, or tell them you're offended. Talk to each other. Free speech and the ability to tolerate offense are the hallmarks of a free and open society. That is the letter, those are the words that Yale students called disgusting, that they said were creating a space for violence. I think it is a tragic and perfect sign of our times. Ultimately, these people resigned their positions as the head of Silliman College at Yale. Now, lest you think I am cherry-picking or making an unfair example of random college students, let me remind you of last year's story, the story of Bret Weinstein and Heather Heying at Evergreen College. A year ago, the pair, married biologists, were tenured professors at Evergreen, where their Occupy Wall Street sympathetic politics were well in tune with the school's progressive ethos. Today, they have left their jobs and they have lost many of their friends. All of this because they opposed a day of absence in which white students were asked to leave campus for the day. For simply questioning a day of racial segregation that was cloaked in progressive values, the pair themselves were smeared as racist, and people stalked campus with baseball bats looking for the biologists. There are serious consequences to this total lack of proportion, and it's not just the reputational damage to those that are slandered. The main effect is that these endless accusations of fascism, of misogyny, of racism, of alt-right, dull the effects of the words themselves. As they are stripped of meaning, they strip us of our sharpness, of our ability to react forcefully to real fascists, to real misogynists, and to real members of the alt-right. If Nicholas and Erica Christakis are violent, and Bret Weinstein and Heather Heying are racist, what then do we do about real violence and real racism? What words are left to describe those true threats? This is a phenomenon that is exacerbated on platforms like Facebook and Twitter, where our angry posts about United Airlines' delayed flight get mixed in with the president's threatening all-caps tweet to Iran, or on cable news, where the saga of Stormy Daniels is treated with exactly the same level of outrage as Trump's abasement before Vladimir Putin. This moral flattening, this erasure of hierarchy, is a moral menace. We need to bring back proportion. Empathy. Empathy is my fourth dirty word. Now, empathy sounds squishy. one of those empty terms you're guaranteed to find in a new agey word salad. But empathy, the ability to understand the feelings of another, is quite serious, and it is quite hard work. And it is essential for a functioning, healthy culture and politics. Yet we are fast losing this skill. I want to offer myself up as an example on the subject of abortion. I figured why not start with a light topic. I am strongly pro-choice. I believe that a woman's right to control our bodies and to decide whether or not we will bring a human being into this world is a fundamental right. And like many other women, perhaps including some of you, given the possibility of Roe v. Wade being overturned, I've been reading a bit about what abortion was like in this country before Roe. The journalist Caitlin Flanagan has written powerfully in The Atlantic about the experience of her mother, who, as a nurse in New York City, attended to the victims of botched back alley and kitchen table abortions. These young women were terrified, alone, and dying, she writes, and yet they spent their last hours on earth being interviewed in the hospital by policemen. She goes on in her essay, which you should look up and read, it's called The Sanguine Sex, to summarize my basic feeling about the right to choose. She writes, 1,000 arguments about the beginning of human life will never appeal to me as powerfully as a terrified pregnant girl desperate for a bit of compassion. But then Flanagan goes on to do something that shocked me as a reader because it's become so very rare. She goes on to explain, having told us about the horrors of a reality in which abortion is illegal, that her sympathy for the beliefs of people who oppose it is enormous. She writes, "An ultrasound image taken surprisingly early in pregnancy can stop me in my tracks. In it is much more than I want to know about the tiny creature whose destruction we have legalized. A beating heart, a human face, functioning kidneys, 2 waving hands that seem not too far away from being able to grasp and shake a rattle." Reading this, I was able to admit something to myself, which is hard to say out loud as a pro-choice feminist. And that is that I am uncomfortable, And that is that I am uncomfortable with the euphemisms that my side tells about this issue. Abortion is not the same as a hip replacement or getting your appendix removed. It's fundamentally different. And I can believe that's true and also remain strongly pro-choice. What Flanagan's essay says is something that has become nearly impossible to say in the current climate. And that is that the strongest arguments on both sides of a hard issue, in this case, abortion, deserve to be grappled with and understood. Reading this did not change my mind, but it helped me empathize with the people that I can caricature as Bible thumpers harassing women outside of clinics with disturbing photographs. Think of an issue you believe in really strongly. Say, amnesty for undocumented immigrants is the only moral solution. Or religion has largely been a force for violence. Or globalization is a good thing. Whatever your issue is, hold it in your mind and ask yourself, can I argue the other side of it without resorting to name-calling or sarcasm? If you were asked to debate the opposite side of the issue, could you give it its most generous and articulate articulation? I'm not proud to admit that this is challenging for me on any number of sensitive issues, but I think it is critical to the liberal project. And it terrifies me that those who are advocating for a politics of greater understanding, a heartbreakingly simple goal, are regularly being punished for it. To give you the most recent example, last week, the film director, Mark Duplass, sent out an anodyne tweet. It read, "Fellow liberal, If you are interested at all in crossing the aisle, you should consider following Ben Shapiro. I don't agree with him on much, but he's a genuine person who once helped me for no other good reason than to be nice. He doesn't bend the truth. His intentions are good. The online mob attacked Duplass so swiftly and so brutally that he deleted that tweet and issued not an apology so much as a confession. That tweet was a disaster on so many levels, he wrote. I want to be clear that I in no way endorse hatred, racism, homophobia, xenophobia, or any other form of intolerance. My goal has always been to spread unity, understanding, and kindness, but I'm going to make mistakes along the way. Sometimes I move too quickly when I get excited, or fail to do enough research, or don't communicate myself clearly. I'm really sorry. I now understand that I have to be more diligent and careful. Now, do you believe that Duplass changed his view on Ben Shapiro in the span of a single day? That he suddenly went from being a nice guy that doesn't bend the truth, who is worth hearing, to a racist, homophobic monster? This is not so much an apology as it is a confession at the end of a kind of modern struggle session. All this for suggesting we should read people who we disagree with. We are living increasingly in a culture in which the mere suggestion of listening and hearing the other side implies complicity in some malevolent enterprise. This is wrong. Empathy is the virtue that allows for what the former Islamist turned reformer Maajid Nawaz has dubbed the rehumanization process, discovering the humanity of the other. This is essential if we are going to rebuild our increasingly tribal and broken culture. We need to bring back empathy. Judgment. The first time I was called a racist was when I answered affirmatively to the following question: are some cultures better than others? A bit of context. I was a freshman in college, and the war in Iraq was raging. And so there was much talk about life under repressive regimes in the Middle East and beyond. I somehow stumbled into a conversation with a few acquaintances, self-described feminists, and we were having a conversation about female genital mutilation, a litmus test issue as far as I'm concerned. Now, thinking I was among like-minded friends, without hesitating, I suggested that a culture that thinks it's acceptable to mutilate the bodies of young girls in this way and to hurt or deny their capacity for pleasure is a categorically inferior one, at least when it comes to the subject of girls and women. They were aghast. They suggested that to say as much made me a bigot. Now, this was the first experience I had walking smack into the wall of cultural relativism, but it would not be the last. In the years since, I have listened to people making excuses for the existence of all kinds of things in faraway lands that they would never endure for a moment in ours. This is how you have the phenomenon of a women's movement here at home that has endless amounts to say about the gender pay gap for American women, but absolutely nothing to say about gender apartheid in Iran, or forced veiling in Afghanistan, or about the fact that in Western Nepal, women are banished from their homes every month when they get their period. Who are we to judge? Is the implicit and morally bankrupt refrain. Discernment is a good thing, and it is necessary in order to articulate what is good and what is evil, which is fundamental to being able to make our societies freer and more just. When you are scared to say that some cultures are better than others on some scores, you begin to justify the unjustifiable under the guise of sensitivity and diversity. Everyone loves diversity, but pointing out genuine difference, drawing real distinctions, that is terrifying. So I'll go out on a limb here and insist that a culture that values the rights of women and girls is better than one that subjugates them. A culture that values the rights of gay people is superior to one that oppresses them. A culture that values the rights of religious minorities is better than one that doesn't. And a culture that values free speech and thinking is better than one with blasphemy laws. This says absolutely nothing, zero, about the nature of people born into repressive and closed societies. All people are born equal, but culture, thank God, is mutable, and we can't move culture without making a judgment about it. If you can't discern the difference between Cuba and Canada on markets, between Gaza and Israel on gay rights, and between China and the US on freedom of religion, you lack judgment, and it's time to bring it back. Reason. Things feel really bad on a regular basis right now. It feels like democracies are in decline, like strong men are on the rise. And if it's not nuclear war with North Korea that's going to kill us, well, maybe we'll all be melting from climate change. The poem that I've seen shared more than any other on social media this year has been Yeats's Second Coming. You know it, but I'll repeat the key part. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. I know, it's uplifting. But that gloomy feeling that Yeats captures so incredibly in that poem, and that we all sort of carry around with us these days, contradicts the data. Because if you look at the facts, the world is getting better on so many measures. As Steven Pinker has pointed out in his fascinating new book, Enlightenment Now, humans used to be lucky if they lived past 30 years old, so I'd be dead already. Today, life expectancy worldwide is around 70, and it is much, much higher in democracies like ours. 200 years ago, 90% of people lived in extreme poverty. Today, it is under 10%. The statistics for things like clean water and the eradication of major diseases are even more jaw-dropping. As for democracy, which is what I spend most of the time worrying about, Pinker points out that despite notable setbacks in countries like Turkey, the world has never been more democratic. 2/3 of human beings live in one. Reason, the power of the mind to think, understand, and form judgments by a process of logic, has given way to feeling, which fuels convenient narratives that we, or at least I, tend to nod along with. Let me give you another example, which comes up constantly, at least in feminist circles, and that is the gender gap in STEM fields. The popular narrative is that this gap is the result of systemic sexism in math and science and computer programming. And it's one that viscerally appealed to me, having been one of those girls that insisted I wasn't a math person and then had that reinforced. But this narrative is belied by the facts. The fact is that the more gender equity there is in a society, the greater the STEM gap is. Finland, Norway, and Sweden have the greatest gaps when it comes to STEM fields, and they are objectively the most equitable countries when it comes to gender. Whereas countries like Algeria, Turkey, Tunisia, and the United Arab Emirates have the most. It turns out that when women have the most choice, they are choosing not to go into STEM fields. The reasons for this are very interesting, and I suggest you look them up. Now, I could choose any number of examples. The left's perception of the motivations behind police brutality, say, which is not to deny the existence of police brutality, but to question the assumption that it is always racially motivated. or the right's perception of immigrants' impact on the economy and society, which the data tells us is overwhelmingly positive, even as Fox News inundates us with misleading anecdotes about immigrant criminality. We need to get the facts straight, to let facts inform the stories we tell rather than the other way around. We need to bring back reason. Doubt. Doubt. In 1944, Learned Hand, and there's no better name in all of American history than Learned Hand, gave a talk in Central Park in front of 1.5 million Americans, among them some 150,000 newly naturalized citizens. World War II was raging, and the event, a patriotic celebration, was called I Am an American Day. The talk that Learned Hand gave became known as the Spirit of Liberty, but his real theme was the theme of doubt. The spirit of liberty, he said, is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which seeks to understand the mind of other men and women. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which weighs their interests alongside its own without bias. Doubt is essential for freedom. Doubt is essential for the freedom to change our minds when better, truer information comes along. Without doubt, we might still believe that the earth is flat. We might still believe that women don't deserve the right to vote, or that black people and white people shouldn't be able to marry each other. I'll give you a more relevant example. In 1989, a young woman was brutally beaten, raped, and left for dead in Central Park. 5 young Black and Latino men between the ages of 14 and 16 were convicted of the crime. At the time, a real estate developer named Donald Trump spent more than $80,000 to take out ads in 4 New York City newspapers, calling for New York to bring the death penalty back. The implication being that these 5 teenagers deserved it. But these boys, who became known as the Central Park Five, did not commit the crime, even though they were jailed for it. Ultimately, their sentences were vacated, and the real criminal, a serial rapist, confessed. For those of you who have not seen the documentary The Central Park Five, about their story and the horrific miscarriage of justice, I can't recommend it more highly. Now, what's incredible is that Donald Trump is still insisting that they did it. I point this out because he's a textbook example of what we know about insecure people, which is that they never admit that they were wrong. The person capable of doubt, of changing her mind, of rethinking her assumptions, is the truly secure person. The quality of doubt, of saying to yourself, I think I'm right, but I'm not 100% sure. I need to recheck my assumptions. I need to give the other person the benefit of the doubt. That is the essence of the truly liberal mind and of the civilized person. Maintaining a constant maintaining a constant tension between doubt and confidence, between intellectual skepticism and moral courage. We need to suffer ourselves to think, as John Stuart Mill honestly described the process of thinking. It causes suffering in On Liberty, and real thinking requires doubt. Indeed, you could say it is the first principle, the 7th word that covers my other 6. Bring back doubt. So those are my 7 dirty words: imagination, humility, proportion, empathy, judgment, reason, and doubt. Perhaps I left some out. Perhaps you would have substituted some of your own. Skepticism, say, or merit, maybe opportunity. My point here isn't to offer you new certitudes or counter-certitudes. It isn't to open a new front in the left-right culture wars. Rather, my purpose is to warn you that the habits of mind that we must ferociously defend and nourish if we want to live in an open society, a society in which people can speak and argue freely in order to think a little more clearly, that those habits of mind are under threat, and not just from people who wear MAGA hats and rage against fake news. They are under threat also from people who think of themselves, no doubt very sincerely, as tolerant and open-minded. The truth about our politics today is that it is no longer a battle between the people we used to call liberals and the people we used to call conservatives. It is between open and closed, liberal and illiberal, big L, big I. And whether you consider yourself a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, or whatever, you can't be indifferent to the outcome of this battle. Not if you treasure the right to dissent, to say no, to protest, to re-examine your assumptions, to speak and to change your mind. It took guts for George Carlin to say those 7 words from that Santa Monica stage half a century ago. We can help honor his legacy today by keeping all the words alive and vibrant, and by defending the qualities of free thinking and independence that made him, and frankly make the American experiment, so genius. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.